President Biden in the Oval Office address last night, the Wall Street Journal editorial page, Biden ducks the farewell question. His speech will do nothing to dispel the view that this was a coup by Democratic power brokers and that he and they and his aides had been hiding the truth about his decline from the voters for months, if not years. He owed the country more than the self-serving, non-campaign speech he chose to deliver. With that, let's start there with the panel. Ben Domenech, editor-at-large for The Spectator, host of the Ben Domenech podcast on Fox News Radio. Democratic campaign consultant Kevin Walling, and Julia Manchester, national politics reporter for The Hill. Ben, fallout from last night?
Plenty of fallout. I think that people were disappointed in that speech, and I think for justifiable reasons. I think that this moment calls for something that was more honest and more personal than what we got, which was essentially, I think a whitewashing of what went on over the past several weeks. A month ago, the idea that this would ever happen seemed absurd. And now we're facing something that we've never faced before as a country. And I think it, in particular, to be incumbent upon the president to have offered something that was much more, for someone who's known for being, wearing his heart on his sleeve, something that was much more personal than what he offered as opposed to essentially a non-campaign speech.
And Julia, to us taking the vice president's remarks after meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu, the reason I said that that's unusual is because we wouldn't usually. Right. But now foreign leaders are going to come here and want to meet with the future Democratic leader and possible next president, which is, it's a different deal if you've got a president who's actually in the seat.
It's a very different deal. And we really haven't seen Kamala Harris prior to her stepping up to the top of the Democratic ticket. We haven't seen her out front the same way that we obviously have seen President Biden. So this is an opportunity for her. I mean, in addition to doing the campaign trail and the run-of-the-mill campaign stuff, she's going to be able to take, these remarks, get them taken by cable news and, expose herself, I think, to the American people. It also opens her up to attacks, though. Remember, this is the moment that Republicans are really seizing on to define Kamala Harris. Right now, they seem to be doing it on the border, but also given the events yesterday that happened in Washington, D.C. following Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's address to Congress, the protests and such, I am curious to see whether this becomes an attack point from Republicans on Kamala Harris.
But it almost seems like they're co-presidents right now, which is a little bizarre. She has been out front, Kevin, before, even though maybe they're saying that she wasn't out front on this one issue. Here's a flashback to March of 2021, President Biden.
There's about 5 other major things she's handling, but I've asked her, the VP today, because she's the most qualified person to do it, to lead our efforts with Mexico and the Northern Triangle and the countries that help. We're going to need help in stemming the movement of so many folks. So it's not her full responsibility and job, but she's leading the effort.
Leading the effort. A lot of media back then took that to mean this. Here's Axios headline: Biden puts Harris in charge of border crisis. Others went on to say it was the border czar. Now Axios this week: Harris border confusion haunts her new campaign, with an editor's note. This article has been updated and clarified to note that Axios was among the news outlets that incorrectly labeled Harris a border czar in 2021. Bottom line is, if you use that term, border czar, like a lot of the media did at the time, or you don't, the president said she was supposed to do was stem the tide of illegal immigrants coming to the border. And obviously that didn't work.
Well, Bret, to your point, specifically it was for those Northern Triangle countries. She went down there, obviously got a lot of grief, actually, from the left parts of my party when she said, do not come, the border's closed.
But they came, and the border was open.
But they did still come. I think one of the good things coming out of that executive order from just this past June is that we see border crossings are now cut in half. They're the lowest points that we've seen since the president took office. But to Julia's point, and certainly with the resolution that the House passed, this is going to be clearly an attack line from Republicans against the vice president. She's going to have to take this head on. I assume she'll probably take another border visit in the coming days and weeks to specifically address this issue. Now she's got a good thing to run on, though, with these crossings cut in half, with this executive order, and a push again for that bipartisan bill.
Ben, it's a little...
They're cut in half because they spiked to the historic highs.
Right.
I mean,
that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that. But it's also part of this whole thing of repackaging. and retooling, and we're going to head to the Chicago Convention, and it's going to be a reimagining of some of the ideas of presidential candidate Kamala Harris, perhaps.
Yes. Look, I think we have to single out today for a moment in which Karine Jean-Pierre launched herself onto the medal standings for greatest performances from press secretaries historically, alongside Baghdad Bob and that nice lady from North Korea. You know, she was channeling Martin Short as the tobacco representative. It's so funny you would think she was a border czar. That's so funny. I can't believe you thought that. Well, you know, this is absurd. It's a rewriting of everything that we knew about her, and the fact is that this was convenient a month ago to assign it to being her responsibility as opposed to Joe Biden's, and now it all has to be retconned going into Chicago.
Julia, we're seeing these polls. This is a New York Times Siena poll. It matches other polls within the margin of error. This is a 1-point spread with former President Trump up there. If you look at the RCP average of battleground states, the former president still has a lead, a substantial lead in some of them, but it's tightened where President Biden was in these state races as of her essentially getting the presumptive nominee nod.
Yeah, so earlier today, The Hill actually released its own polling in a number of these battleground states, and we saw a tightening. The only real gap, and it wasn't a huge gap, was in Arizona. They're tied in battleground Michigan, Michigan, but in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and in North Carolina, it's still, they're within 2 to 3 points of each other. The margin of error is 3 points. So it's certainly tightening. I think a lot of this has to do with Democratic enthusiasm. Though we saw that Democratic enthusiasm was low under Biden, it's bounced back.
You got to go quickly, Kevin, but do you guess that a VP candidate is going to come from one of those swing states where they're in the single digits?
Absolutely. Either Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, Roy Cooper in North Carolina. I think it's likely between those two.
Mark Kelly in Arizona?
Mark Kelly potentially in Arizona. That's a tough Senate seat to give up, even to have a special there. So I think it's going to be one of those two guys.
Okay. Panel, thanks so much.